So the trends in animal production that you all know is currently the feed prices are rising sky high, which means that when you talk to nutritionists, the first thing they say is that they take out feed additives because of the cost. Which means that, of course, what you have to address is that the return on investment is key. What you have to prove is that when you add something to the diet, that you earn more than you invest. It has always been that way, but now with the high feed price, it's more than ever. So if you talk about the increased return investment, it's by improved intestinal health in broilers or increased nutrient digestibilities, less wet litter problems, so you have a higher hygiene status in the birds, or improved production efficiency. So these are the few things that you have to prove before you can enter a feed additive into a broiler diet. Just to see what are the challenges in broilers, this is the result of an evaluation that is done on a yearly basis by the Animal Health Services in the Netherlands. So they get broilers that are sent in for post-mortem evaluation, and what they do, they start defining which is the main cause of the mortality. What we are doing with broilers, we are selecting them for a high growth rate and feed efficiency. And you should realize that within the last 30 years, we are reducing the feed intake per kilogram of body weight gain by 30%. So the modern broiler is eating 30% less per kilogram body weight gain. So they are much more efficient. And of course, we can ask whether the nutrient contents, the vitamin content, and so are still up to date. But what we see in this post-mortem evaluations is that first week disorders, first week mortality account for about 20% of the problem in the broilers. Digestive disorders for about 15%, respiration disorders for about 8%, locomotion disorders for 25-26%, and other general disorders for about 30%. You should realize that if we talk about digestive disorders and locomotion disorders, they are highly related. So if you have a very poor intestinal health, you have a lot of bacterial translocations, the bacteria settle in the bone and cause, for instance, femur head necrosis. So lameness in birds is very often related to stress and to intestinal health problems. Another trend, and I've been visiting a few big integrations here in Argentina the last couple of days, is the ban on in-feed antibiotics. And I've learned that also in Argentina, that's about 50% of the broilers are already produced without antibiotics in the feed, so already on drug-free programs. The ban on in-feed antibiotics is one of the big challenges that we have to face. In some countries, for instance in the US, they also include ionophore coxiostats in the same program because they have antimicrobial effects. So in Europe it's not, and I don't think in Argentina it's also not included. But what you see in some countries is that ionophores are included in those drug-free programs. The other thing that we see is subclinical coxiosis. So what you see if you are using certain coxiostats for longer periods of time, the Eimeria might also produce some resistancy against those coxiostats. And then you get subclinical coxiosis, although you're using coxiostat programs in the feed. So the thing that you might do then is that you use vaccination against coxiosis to re-enter a sensitive Eimeria population into the farm, so that your coxiostats are still working again. And of course, one of the most important things in all these items is that you have to safeguard intestinal health. There was a nice review of a field study in 2015 in Canada, where they compared a drug-free program with a conventional program in broilers. It contained about 1.5 million broilers over about 100 different barns. And what they did, they measured performance, they measured some problems in wet litter problems, feed conversion ratio, and this is more or less what they found. On livability, there was no real difference in mortality. On condemnation at the slaughterhouse, they found a small increase, but not significantly. This, by the way, is different from different countries. I've seen similar trials in Europe, for instance, where they found a clear increase in condemnations. On average daily gain, this is the first step where you can see a clear reduction in average daily gain in a drug-free program. At the same time, feed conversion ratio is clearly going up. So in drug-free programs, if you are not able to maintain intestinal health in the broilers, you lose about 6 points FCR. And if you think about the high feed costs, this is a very expensive one. Litter humidity, the day before slaughter, is also clearly increased. And this is also one of the consequences of poor intestinal health, that what you see immediately is that litter wetness is increasing. And the most striking observation that they did is that they found NE outbreaks, necrotic enteritis outbreaks, in about 25% of the farms, and subclinical cases in about 50% of the farms. So it shows that the negative effects that you find in drug-free programs, or the risks that you have in drug-free programs, is that you see that the risk is clearly increasing. This is a trial that I've done in 2005, just before the ban on in-feed antibiotics in Europe. And what we're testing is what's the effect of a coxiosis infection, a Clostridial infection, or the combination between both on voluntary feed intake. The green line here is the control. Those birds were not infected. The blue triangles, the closed ones, only had a coxiosis infection. The open triangles only had a Clostridium infection. And the red ones had a coxiosis infections followed by Clostridium infection. Here you can see the age of the birds and the daily feed intake. And you can see here that from day 9 to day 20, there's a clear increase in feed intake day by day. And that's also what you expect when the birds grow, they will eat more. When the birds were only infected at day 9 with Eimeria maxima, you can see that still follows quite closely the control. Maybe a small dip 6 days after the coxiosis infection, which is more or less what you can imagine, because that's more or less when the coxiosis infection is at its peak. But for the rest, it was just following the feed intake of the control. Just the Clostridium infection at day 14, 15, and 16, those are the open triangles. They follow the control also. But the combination between both was very detrimental to the birds. So first they had at day 9 the coxiosis infection, and then at day 14, 15, and 16 the Clostridium infection, and you see that the voluntary feed intake is going down immediately. So within 24 hours, feed intake was down by 50 to 60%. So at day 16 was a dip of 65% reduction. And you can imagine that that's for a flock detrimental, because the birds will lose body weight gain. It was about 200, 250 grams at day 37. But at the same time, it was clearly indicating an inflammatory response. So the birds develop an inflammation. They are developing a fever. And one of the characteristics of a fever is that you feel not hungry anymore and you don't want to eat. One of the other things that if you are in bed sick with a flu, you mobilize your muscle tissue, you lose weight. And this is also what you see here on this slide. It was done to have some post-mortem indications for an inflammatory response in the intestinal tract of a broiler. And if you look to C and D, you can see here that this is a normal intestinal tract. If you do post-mortem and you open the intestinal tract, it immediately contracts, so the intestinal tract opens. C2 is a consequence of intestinal inflammation. So due to the inflammation in the intestinal tract, all the muscle that is covering the intestine is mobilized. So here you don't see muscle anymore. So it cannot contract. So the peristalsis, antiperistalsis, the absorption of nutrients is all gone. The same you see in D1 and D2. D2 is a normal intestinal tract, so it's a rather thick tissue. D1 is an inflamed intestinal tract. And what you see is that the muscle is totally gone. So we also showed the effect of an inflammatory response on this slide. So what we did, we fed the broilers or aspirin in drinking water. So we tried to reduce the inflammatory response after a necrotic enteritis infection. So we had, the first one is non-infected, non-treated. So those are healthy birds. The second one had the infection model without treatment. And you can see here that due to the infection, we lost about 15% on body weight gain. At the same time, FCR was going up by about 5%. So this is much lower than I showed before, but still it's substantial increase in feed conversion ratio. If we added aspirin to healthy birds, no effect on body weight gain and no effect on feed conversion ratio. But if we added aspirin to infected birds, you can see here the body weight gain was clearly improved and the feed conversion ratio was back to normal. Is this a solution? No, it's not, because we can still see here that the lesions, necrotic enteritis lesions, were not affected. So the birds still have the lesions, but what you do is that you reduce the negative effect on production performance. So if you are looking for alternatives to replace in-feed antibiotics, on one hand side, you want to limit the negative consequences on body weight gain, but on the other hand, you also want to reduce the lesions. You want to make sure that the infection is less. So the necrotic enteritis will not reduce, so we need other measures to be additive to the anti-inflammatory effects. So if we see the intestinal tract as a first line defense, we have more or less 3 levels. One is what Steve already indicated, that you want to control the infection rate, you want to control the activity of the microbes. So this is what the first step, that we want to reduce the virulence of the intestinal microflora. The second one is that we want to reduce the negative effects on the cell line of the intestinal tract. So we want to improve the enterocyte integrity, so that there are no bacteria that can pass through the intestinal wall to the body. And the last one is to improve the immunocompetence. And we want to improve the immunocompetence because when there are bacteria passing, that the animal is able to kill whatever is passing. So if the bacteria, due to lesions from coxiosis or due to lesions from Clostridia, are passing because there are lesions, that the animal has the capabilities, the immunocompetence to kill the antigens that pass into the body. So what I will do, I will focus on essential oils and butyrate. So if we just picture the intestinal wall, intestinal wall, this is the intestinal lumen, this is the cell line that covers the villi, and this the body side. So on the intestinal lumen, you have a lot of bacteria, you have viruses, you have parasites, you have fungi, and that's a part that you want to control. You want to reduce the pathogenicity of the microbes in the intestinal tract. Because if they don't produce toxins, or if they don't produce biofilms, or they don't adhere to the intestinal tract, then the damage that they possibly can do is much lower. You can control that. And what we can do with essential oils is, we call it quorum sensing inhibition. We can avoid crosstalk between bacteria. So in that case, bacteria don't start producing toxins and they don't start becoming pathogenic. On top of that, of course, we can also kill the bacteria, for instance, by short-chain fatty acids that can reduce the intracellular pH in the bacteria, by which the bacteria die. The second step is that we want to maintain the integrity of this cell layer, because if the cell layer is closed, then it's very difficult for bacteria to pass. And that's what we do by reducing the oxidation in those cells, in those bacterial cells, because in that case, they live longer, they have more time to differentiate, have more time to absorb nutrients and develop a good tight junction, a good closure between the cells. The last one is immunity, where we try to improve the phagocytic activity, the eating capacity of the macrophages, and to produce antibodies, what we call the humoral defense mechanism. I will just show with you just one demonstration of a trial from literature where they had a negative control, and that was a two-phase corn soy diet. A positive control where they used colistin and vaginomycin as etymocrobial growth promoters, and they used natural essential oils from oregano or synthetic essential oils from oregano. So what we are claiming is that when a plant is making essential oils as a defense for the plant, for bacteria to protect it against bacterial invasions or plant viruses or parasites, they produce essential oils with a lot of different functions. Functions that are, for instance, antibacterial. They don't just produce carvacrol, they don't just produce thymol, but there are mixtures of a lot of different active components. So in this natural essential oil, it contains all the active ingredients. In the synthetic essential oil, they just used carvacrol and thymol. I think it was on a 50-50 basis to mimic the natural essential oil. They tested these 4 treatments in broiler experiments with 16 broilers per pen, 6 replicated floor pens, and used our acres 50-50 male and female. So this is a trial from literature. So I just put a whole table on the screen. Just if you look to average daily gain was significantly improved. The negative control, positive control. So they lost about 2 grams per day. With the natural essential oil, you can see it is better than the positive control. And the synthetic essential oil has a lower average daily gain. Feed conversion ratio, similar, 1.86, 1.84. So you gain 2 points FCR if you use a AGP program. With the natural essential oils, it was lower than the positive control. And with synthetic essential oils, it was a bit less compared to natural oil. The next step that they did was looking at the antioxidant enzymes. So the enzymes that a bird can produce to reduce oxidation in the cells. And here you can see that there was a clear reduction in the glutathione peroxidase and the superoxide dismutase, just 2 of those antioxidant enzymes. Here you can see that with the positive control was a clear increase. With the natural oil, it was similar to the positive control, and the synthetic was slightly less. MDA is the final product that is formed by oxidation. So you want to have that as low as possible. Here you can see that you can reduce it by an AGP program, but also by the essential oils. One last part that I will show on this slide is quite interesting, where they looked at the enzyme activity in duodenum. So the enzymes that are produced by the bird to digest the feed, trypsin and chymotrypsin for protein digestion, lipase for fat digestion, or amylase for starch digestion. And what you can see here is that the essential oils can clearly stimulate those enzymes produced by the pancreas to digest the feed. So this also what is claimed, or what is seen by essential oils, is that they improve digestibility of the feed. What they also did is measuring villus height, so how high are the villi in the intestinal tract, crypt depth, which is the part where the new cells are formed, and the villus-crypt ratio. And they did it in duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, and I just gave the data for day 42. And what you can see here is that, okay, if I take day 42 on the village height crib depth ratio, which is an indication for intestinal health, you can see here that with the natural essential oils and the synthetic essential oils are better than both controls, the negative control or the positive control in duodenum. You see the same in jejunum, and in the ileum the effect is less because the villus height in the jejunum or in the ileum is much lower compared to the earlier parts of the small intestine. So this was just giving you some examples of the effect of essential oils. Butyrate effects are an energy source for epithelial cells. So if you feed butyrate in the feed, it's absorbed by the intestinal tract and it can be used as an energy source. So the enterocytes can grow on it. So it's good for the maintenance and the intestinal villus structure. It improves therefore also the mucosal barrier function because butyrate also has an antioxidant effect. And because of the fact that it is an energy source, it can stimulate differentiation of the enterocytes. It also results by that in better tight junction protein, so better closure of the cells. But at the same time, you have to realize that you can also overdo the thing by having a very strong overdose, which can be negative. It increases the antimicrobial peptides that are secreted by the bird. It has clear anti-inflammatory effects, and I already indicated what's the effect of inflammation on the intestinal integrity. And there are indications that it makes the bird more robust against coccidial challenges. I have been asked several times whether coating of butyric acid is a true story. What happens with coating of butyric acid? What they did in this trial that was done about 5 years ago, they fed birds just normal butyric acid and fat-coated butyric acid. If you feed normal butyric acid and the same with essential oils, they are absorbed very quickly in the intestinal tract. So what they did, they labeled the butyric acid and fed it to the bird. Here you can see with the green line, if they fed an uncoated form, they start feeding at time 0, you can see immediately there's a high peak in the label in the expiration air. So what happens? Butyric acid is absorbed by the enterocytes, it's metabolites, and after metabolization, it comes into the CO2, and that's in the air that you breathe. So they could analyze the expiration air, and based on the label, they could conclude how long it took before the butyric acid was absorbed. So when you see here, within 1 hour, a very high peak, and then it comes down very quick to realize the standard level at 6 to 7 hours after the start. So it means that after 6, 7 hours, all the butyric acid that you have fed by the feed is gone. It's metabolized. If they use the fat-coated butyric acid, you can see that the peak is much lower. But then it stayed high at a much longer period of time. So it's an indication that when you coat the butyric acid, it takes much more time before it's absorbed. So it also reaches the hindgut. So then butyric acid is not only effective in the directly after the stomach, but it's also effective in the last part of the small intestine. If we use essential oils in the same coating, it follows the same pattern of absorption. So we want essential oils also to reach the hindgut, we have to coat it. Otherwise, it's already gone in the proximal part of the small intestine. And that's the basis for fat coating of these fat-soluble ingredients. So Olus Plus is making Elan Plus C4. It's a combination between butyric acid and essential oils. And the essential oils come from anise oil, which is the main ingredient, anethol, oregano, containing carvacrol and thymol. And I already indicated the difference between natural oil and synthetic oregano oil. Garlic is using D-allyl disulfide, which is a very strong antibacterial effect. And cinnamon contains cinnamaldehyde and eugenol. If you just look at the direct MIC value, so how strong are these ingredients to kill bacteria, At pH 6 against Clostridium perfringens, butyric acid doesn't do much. Lauric acid is very effective. Thymol and cinnamaldehyde, they have a clear effect. So it means that if you would use butyric acid to control Clostridium perfringens, it's not the best solution. So the combination between butyric acid that stimulates intestinal integrity, that stimulates an energy source for the enterocytes, is supportive to, for instance, the effect of thymol and cinnamaldehyde. And what Olus Plus is a company, I already said, a family-owned company in the Netherlands that produces phytogenic solutions. We have our own trial facilities, and we try to demonstrate the efficacy under commercial conditions. So we put pens in the middle of a broiler house. So the broilers in these pens face exactly the same challenges that normally broilers face in a broiler house. So when there is big difference between night temperature and day temperature, or when there is a coxiosis challenge through the barn, or when there is a wet litter problem or whatever, the birds in the pens face the same as the birds in a commercial house. That's totally different from when we do university trials where there's a perfect climate condition, or where in that case you have to put a challenge to the birds that might be overdone. It might be a very strong challenge that doesn't have anything to do with practice. So what we prefer to do is that we prove the efficacy of our products in a commercial house. So here you see the pens, about 23 broilers per pen. They have their own feeding. We measure per phase the feed intake, the body weight gain, and the feed conversion ratio. And in this way we can conclude about the efficacy of the essential oil products or the dose levels that we use under commercial circumstances. So first I will show two studies where we used Elan Plus. Elan Plus is the product without butyric acid. Ross 308 broilers, 8 pens per treatment, 25 broilers per pen. It was a 3-phase wheat, corn, soy diet, and we used a starter, a grower, and a finisher. And we used Maxiban as a coxiostat during the first 28 days, and no coxiostat in the finisher phase. All diets contained medium-chain fatty acids, and that is one of the solutions that was used in Europe after the ban on AGPs, that we used palm kernel fatty acids as medium-chain fatty acids. It has a clear effect against Clostridiae. I showed you one of the slides before. The MIC value of lauric acid against Clostridium is quite high. We had a control and a test diet, and the difference was just the addition of Elan Plus. And the birds had ad lib access to feed and water. So if you look to the final body weight, it was a 41 gram increased final body weight. Just remember the 41 gram. On the feed conversion ratio, which was corrected to the average body weight, was improved by 2.2 points FCR. Daily gain was increased by 1.8%. So just keep these data in mind, because right now I will show you a trial where we said, okay, we will have using Elan plus C4, so the combination between butyric acid and the same Elan plus. So the trial setup was the same, where the pens again in the commercial setting. In this case, we used Elan plus C4 500 gram per metric ton during 35 days. So with Elan plus C4 alone was 44 grams. If we make the combination, it was 78 grams. The feed conversion ratio was 2.2 points FCR improvement. When we do this way, it was 2.6 points FCR improvement. Daily gain was improved by 4% versus, I think it was 2.5% in the previous trials. So it indicates that if we added butyric acid, it increases the performance effects of Elan Plus. What we also saw is that when we were looking at daily gain in the starter phase was improved by 2.6%, in the grower phase by 3.3%, and in the finish phase by 5.9%. Also indicated here, and the reason for the 5.9% in the finish phase, to my understanding, or that would be due to the fact that we took out our ionophore coxiostat at day 28. Ionophore is also controlling bacterial growth. We took it out, so we have some bacterial overgrowth. So when you have bacterial overgrowth and you add essential oils in combination with butyric acid, you can control the bacterial growth. And that's also the reason why the effect of Elan plus C4 in the finisher phase is higher than in the starter and the grower phase. The fact that it's increasing with age, that's normal, because you see normally the biggest challenges on intestinal health starting after, let's say, around 3 weeks of age. And then it grows over time. So the fact that this in the grower phase was larger than in the starter phase, completely logic. So the conclusion on Elan plus C4 is that it improved growth during the complete growing cycle. The effects increased with age from 2.6% in the starter phase to 5.9% in the finisher phase. The FCR after correction for the difference in final body weight were improved by 2.6 points, and the return of investment of Elan plus C4 was free at the price of 2019. So right now with the increased feedstuff cost, return investment is increasing. So right now you can say, okay, we did some trials in the Netherlands, we did some trials in Europe, so big deal. So I would also like to present to you a trial that we finished last year in Brazil by the Universidade Federal de Goiás. And what we try to do is to see what Elan plus C4 could do in a program where we compared a drug program, HEP program, with a drug-free program. So what we did, we had a negative control diet that just had coxiostats. Coxiostats with nicarbazine, monazine, salinomycin up to the grower 2, and no coxiostat in the finisher. The positive control also had, apart from the coxiostats, an HEP program. HEPs were chlorohydroquinolone during the pre-start and the starter, and erythromycin in the grower and the finisher. Then we had the trial where the treatment where we had a negative control, so no HEP program, with Elan plus C4. So what we try to do in this trial is to see what's the added effect of Elan plus C4 in a situation where the birds didn't have HEPs, and whether the Elan plus C4 could reach a similar final result as the HEP program. The trial was not perfect, and I will tell you well. So we had a weight gain at 42 days, the negative control, so the drug-free program, 3600, the HEP program, 3700, so there was a different 115 gram. So with the HEP program, we lost 150 gram body weight gain. The Elan plus C4 was quite similar to a positive control, a little bit lower, but more or less similar. If you look to the feed conversion ratio corrected for the same body weight, you can see that it was 1.571 in negative control. With the Elan plus C4, it was 1.527, so we gained about 4.5 points FCR compared to the negative control. This one, I don't understand. We had a positive control with a higher FCR than a negative control. Whether they did a mistake in the feed intake measurements, I don't know. So we will redo the trial. But the most important thing is that in the negative control, so on top of a drug-free program, we could improve feed conversion ratio by 4.5 points. And if we calculate based on the increased feed efficiency, what's the return on investment? With the price of €370 per ton, which were the price at that moment, it was a return on investment of 6. So the Elan plus C4, the combination between the essential oil mixtures and the butyric acid, clearly is able to improve broiler performance, body weight gain, to a similar level as the positive control, the HEP program. And on that drug-free program, it could improve FCR by about 4.5 points. So what we show on the benefits of Elan Plus C4, it improved the absorption of nutrients, resulting in a better feed efficiency. It had a better intestinal integrity, and due to the better intestinal integrity, we saw a reduced wet litter problem. We have more stable, predictable, uniform broiler performance. We had improved body weight and feed efficiency. And I think what we have shown is that a solid base for AGP replacement and coming to a drug-free program. And what we have shown, and I just presented some trials where we have shown that the effect of an Elan plus butyric acid had higher effects on production performance than essential oil mixture alone. I thank you for your attention.
Hello. Thank you, Sham. Nice presentation again. Okay. Bueno, terminadas las presentaciones, agradecemos a los tres participantes. Please, Steve, come here, and Christian, please. Un aplauso para ellos por sus presentaciones. Y los invitamos a hacer preguntas, o sea, que hayan quedado dudas durante las tres presentaciones. Tenemos un rato, así que tranquilos para preguntar. Si ¿alguien tiene preguntas? Hay otro micrófono. Ok. We will run. ¿Alguna pregunta? Paulito.
Can you indicate for whom? Then
Yes. ¿Para quién es?
No, para los tres, felicitarlos por las exposiciones. La verdad que fueron muy buenas, muy enriquecedoras. Ha sido un día ganado a la vida, digamos, estar acá con ellos. Pero para Jan lo que quería preguntarle era, normalmente tenemos buena calidad intestinal en los primeros 30 días y se nos cae la calidad intestinal hacia el final de la crianza. De acuerdo a tu experiencia, ¿esto es algo normal? O sea, encontramos mucho material, mucho alimento sin digerir en la medida que pasa el tiempo. ¿Es algo que lo ves normalmente? ¿Es algo que es una anomalía? ¿Qué es lo que pensás?
what you see is that when there is microbial growth in the intestinal tract, and let's say microbial overgrowth, then you will see the first thing that you have undigested feed because the functions of the enterocytes is getting less. So I would say that if we see a problem with intestinal digestibility, it's mainly in the later phases, and it has several reasons. When we have a starter diet, we feed a highly concentrated diet, highly digestible nutrients. And when the birds grow older, we start reducing the protein content, increasing the fat content, the energy content, using lower quality of feed ingredients. We start increasing, for instance, and right now I'm talking from the European perspective, we start increasing, for instance, wheat levels, which has a lower digestibility as, for instance, corn. So on the one hand side, we want to control intestinal health, but we take advantage of the birds when growing older, that we use different feedstuffs, different feed composition that might be less digestible than, for instance, starter diet. So it has different reasons. But normally we see, especially around 28, 35 days, that there's more problems in digestibility. After that, it goes better again, because in that case, the bird is used to the differences. Part of the negative effects is also coming from a coxiosis that is more prominent in 4-week-old birds compared to young birds, or secondary bacterial infection that follow the coxiosis. So it has partly due to intestinal health and partly due to the feed that we produce for the bird, which must be as economically as possible. So thanks for the question.
No, gracias a usted. Y le quería preguntar, aprovecho, si me permitís. Cuando estás hablando, nuestro amigo de Gran Bretaña, no recuerdo el nombre, Steve. En muchas granjas, aquí en la integración avícola, hay mucha gente que produce, además de aves, ¿estás escuchando? Además de aves, produce otro tipo de animales. Y hoy te vi, independientemente de las ratas y de otros animales que ya sabemos que son perniciosos, tenés una escala de animales que son más o menos perniciosos, qué sé yo, vaca, oveja, caballo, cerdo, pato. ¿Cuáles son los animales que más contaminan el ambiente a la vuelta de una granja?
The most contaminant. You measure if you have this data. No, you are producing broiler, right? You are producing pork, duck, etc. Just how you qualify which one is the most dirty, the most dangerous, the environment. No le queda muy clara la pregunta, pero, o sea, básicamente, ¿cuál es la más, vamos a hablar en criollo, la más sucia de las producciones?
Digamos, ¿cómo ser?
O la más complicada.
Está clarísimo que el cerdo es bastante complicado, pero yo he visto que hay mucha producción ovina, que hay mucha gente que utiliza ovejas para cortar el pasto. Ocupan el pasto que está a la vuelta para darle de comer a las vacas. Se hacen cultivos a la vuelta de la granja para ocupar el lugar y entonces aparecen las ratas y aparecen otros bichos.
Okay, I understand now. So, looking at the different species, each is vulnerable to external pests, be that general wildlife or insects, etc. It does vary from species to species. We do note that for poultry, the biggest problem is wild bird contact, particularly for transmission of things such as avian influenza. One of the big challenges we see on poultry sites, particularly, is where you get wild birds defecating onto the roof of buildings. Rain then can wash those droppings hopefully into the guttering and away safely, but if there's problems with the roof, if there's damage to the roof, that can drip straight inside and provide a very quick route for contamination. Turning to pig production, the bigger problem we tend to see there is rats and other small vermin entering the site, and that, particularly on multi-age sites, is a real problem because they will move from building to building and very often transfer pathogens from the immuno-strong adults through to the much weaker immune piglets and the young. So that is a major issue there. If we consider cow production, meat production, there's a wide range of challenges. Again, you can see rats and other vermin moving through the building and potentially transferring a number of diseases that way. And of course, insect control is a major concern with cattle production in particular. So in every case, there are challenges. There are different challenges. Would I say one is harder to control than the other? No, I think each of them is as difficult. It's just the mechanisms and the threats do vary by species. Does that answer? Yeah.
Ok. Otra pregunta ahí, Diego.
Sí, bueno, primero que nada, felicitaciones por las 3 disertaciones que fueron temas muy interesantes. Yo tengo 2 preguntas para Cristian. Primero, Cristian, ¿cuál es tu experiencia o tu opinión sobre la presencia de niveles bajos de distintas micotoxinas en los alimentos? Y segundo, conociendo el análisis que tenés sobre los maíces que ustedes utilizan, que son, bueno, parte de los maíces argentinos, ¿cuál es la dosis que recomendás del uso del MTX para de alguna manera solucionar o prevenir el desafío?
Claro. Sobre la primera pregunta, sobre los niveles bajos, en realidad nosotros ya damos por sentado de que tenemos una contaminación de la materia prima, en este caso del maíz, de más de 2000 ppb. Pero eso no significa de que esos 2000 ppb yo los voy a encontrar en alimento. En alimento, haciendo la dilución, aproximadamente tenemos entre 800 a 1200 ppb de fumonicinas, que es básicamente lo que encontramos, al menos en las condiciones de Perú. La única micotoxina, digamos, que está en un nivel que sí podría hacer una afectación al desempeño productivo, a un nivel subclínico, sería la fumonicina. La semana pasada estuve en Ecuador y ahí, por ejemplo, sí hay una co-contaminación de fumonicina más aralenona, igual a unas concentraciones en donde sí podrían comprometer el desempeño productivo, principalmente al tratarse de la aralenona para cerdas reproductoras. Entonces ya partimos con que niveles bajos muy pocas veces estamos encontrando. Co-contaminación va a depender mucho de la época del año en la que ese maíz está creciendo o está cosechándose y finalmente lo que yo pueda tener de algún mal almacenamiento en campo. Una experiencia que tuvimos, por ejemplo, en Colombia fue que los niveles de contaminación tanto del grano como del alimento balanceado, cuando estaban en planta de alimentos, estaban a niveles bajos, porque la empresa hacía la separación de impurezas y solamente trabajaba con el grano. Pero en campos empezaron a presentar problemas, relacionados muy fuertes con micotoxinas a nivel ya de sintomatología clínica. Y finalmente, después de averiguar más a detalle cuál era el problema principal, era la limpieza de los hilos, porque el alimento salía limpio de planta de alimentos, pero llegaba a los hilos y ahí estaba la contaminación. Y finalmente hicimos análisis en el alimento, pero en el comedero ya que los animales están consumiendo, y encontramos niveles muy altos. Entonces, esa sería la primera consulta. Y después la otra consulta es, de acuerdo a los niveles que nosotros estamos teniendo, 2000 ppb de fumonicina en materia prima, en esos casos se suele alterar un poco la dosis. En dietas preiniciadoras e iniciales, hasta los 21 días, tratamos de tener una protección mayor, porque en esos días los animales son más susceptibles a las micotoxinas, además que están desarrollando su propio sistema inmune, la integridad intestinal también, y más bien tratamos de tener una dosis menor a partir de los 21 días hasta la saca. Pero igual la recomendación siempre se basa en este caso nosotros tenemos el algoritmo para poder sugerir una cantidad, que igual esa recomendación tiene que ser validada por nosotros, porque finalmente eso son ecuaciones matemáticas y tal vez nosotros, por cuestiones logísticas, si es que el algoritmo nos recomienda 900 gramos, tal vez para nosotros sea más fácil poner 1 kilo por tonelada, ¿no? Pero bueno, es básicamente eso. Lo que nosotros tratamos siempre de llegar es que el secuestrante se usa de manera preventiva, sí, pero la dosis es la que tiene que variar entre cuando yo tenga contaminaciones más bajas y altas.
Gracias.
¿Alguna pregunta? Pasa, acá sale allá Alejandro McCormick.
Sí, buen día. Para Steve Brown, quería consultarte para desinfectar por nebulización en una planta de incubación con el desinfectante. 1 en 16 es una dilución correcta para utilizarla como esporicida o hay que aumentarla.
Okay, spores are a particularly challenging organism, as you will be well aware. The use of glutaraldehyde is definitely optimal against spores. It does depend specifically on the spores you're looking at. I would suggest, typically, if you really do have a serious spore problem, you would probably look at a dilution of about 1 to 50 to immediately remediate the spore problem, and then after that you can revert to a more normal 1 to 150 dilution to keep the issue under control. So 1 to 50 as an intervention, and then 1 to 150 for routine control.
Gracias.